Hello and welcome to the Dread Expanse. I'm Itch the Quack and I hope you're having a less quack day than myself. Just as a warning right now, this is not the normal speculation I generally do, unfortunately. So, is that it? Is that the ending of the Black Empire and the Old Gods? All that's built up for that? Really? The quick answer is no. The short answer is no, and the long answer is no. Now, I'll be honest. I've been working on a theory, a long one, and I really didn't want to leave it. But I feel like I need to get my head out of the pond to address the general reactions and disappointment surrounding the ending of 8.3. And so, here we are. To start things off on the wrong foot, I'm going to antagonize those who feel let down by the ending of 8.3, by asking, what did you expect? And that isn't a jab at Blizzard, I might add. I am genuinely curious about what did you expect from the ending of BFA and its story. Why? Well, put plainly, if you were reading a book, would you expect the climax to occur in the prologue? What am I talking about? To do a quick review of World of Warcraft's expansions, Vanilla through Wrath had fairly substantial endings, as in KT, KJ, and Arthas. These three had lore that had been built up for ages, as in had entirely different games build upon their characters. So when we defeated them, all of their defeats felt quite weighted and the endings matched. Then we get Kata, and where Deathwing was certainly built up for ages, his defeat was most certainly, or at least from what I remember, lackluster in comparison to the other expansions I have just mentioned, especially in comparison to Arthas, who had just come before in Wrath. The reason I think this occurred is because when you look back at Cataclysm and where it sits, as in just after Wrath and just before Pandaria, Cataclysm quite obviously acts as a prologue / minor epilogue. Cataclysm and a lot of the events that occurred during it set up what was to come in the future. I mean, the world was literally reshaped, we got continents worth of new quests, and even though we defeated Deathwing, the plot surrounding him never really vanished, as in the Old God threat was still a very real thing. I'd also like to point out now that around Cataclysm, we got a lot of extra lore surrounding World of Warcraft in multiple books and a lot of short stories, all with the express intent of building up the lore of World of Warcraft. The reason why was, at the time, the stories of the Warcraft universe were in need of new blood. The only really established stories Blizzard had at the time were the Old Gods / Deathwing and the Legion. All of the other stories that surrounded World of Warcraft at the time still needed a lot more build-up to do them justice. And so we got Kata, which slightly progressed the Old God plot forward, but mainly set up the next big story arc of World of Warcraft, which concluded in Legion. Everything that occurred in Antorus fundamentally happened because a red dragon called Rheastraza chose to purify a black dragon egg. And if the IRL importance of the name Rhea doesn't ring a bell, I would highly suggest looking it up. The imprisonment of Sargeras and the Pantheon is an event on par with, if not bigger than, the fall of Arthas. Every expansion ending, from Kata to WoD, pales in comparison, and if anything, slowly got bigger up until Antorus. You could argue Cataclysm's ending had more weight than most because of Deathwing, but that would only be the case because of the established lore outside of the MMO. Now we come to BFA, the expansion after Legion, after the conclusion of a massive arc that carried similar weight to the fall of Arthas. An expansion that, for the most part, has basically mimicked every aspect of Cataclysm. New lore, new threats, a faction conflict, an Old God threat, the list goes on. But frankly put, BFA in no way, shape or form is supposed to be a Wrath or Legion equivalent when it comes to epic climaxes. The reason why is BFA is basically the prologue expansion for the next arc of World of Warcraft, and similar to its predecessor, Cataclysm, it once again slowly progressed the plot of the Old Gods. I mean, the very concept of 8.3 should be indication things are far from over with the Old Gods. And yes, we fought some of the Black Empire. Yes, we just went into Ny'alotha, and yes, we just defeated N'Zoth. However, if you think he's dead, and this is the end of the Old God threat, you've got another thing coming. Xal'atath is a weapon that has basically been confirmed to have the properties of a soulstone, so the fact he was stabbed by the thing heavily indicates at least a portion of N'Zoth is still left, and I feel like I can safely say that is more than enough to bring about the end of the Black Empire. Not mentioning the fact that Azshara basically confirms she's going after one of the high seats at the table, most likely the high seat of Shadow. And for the loud complaints, not the reasonable ones, just the very, very loud complaints about N'Zoth being of the Shadow, so he should have seen us coming and have been impossible to defeat, etc, etc. Frankly, there is a difference between seeing all futures and being prepared for all futures. I've technically gone over this before, but to give the fundamental idea behind why N'Zoth is currently in dire straits, there are an infinite amount of futures. Some futures are more likely than others. Some are near certainties, while others are practical impossibilities. There is no way the Shadow can prepare for all of them. So what the Shadow does is hedge its bets, by acting over millennia, and even then, there is still the real possibility of something completely unprecedented happening that throws everything off. In N'Zoth's case, that was Sylvanas becoming War Chief. The act was so unprecedented in regards to everything in World of Warcraft. Whatever futures N'Zoth planned for would have been thrown out the window. And from there, assuming N'Zoth has seen the realigned futures, which is highly likely considering he's been warning us throughout BFA of what is to come, N'Zoth has been completely out of time to readjust, and has basically hit the panic button in BFA, using every force he has on Azeroth to get a slim chance of conquering the planet, which as we seem to obviously know, is going to fail. Though everything I just said is not the point, is it? It's not the reason why most of the player base has complaints about the ending of BFA. From what I can tell, the main complaint is, this is not how an expansion should end, regardless of the character. The fact N'Zoth is an old god has just added fuel to the fire. And where, for the most part, I do agree with that statement. The ending of BFA feels flat, and this is not how an expansion should end. I, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on your view, understand all stories, especially great ones, have to start somewhere. And because there has been a move by Blizzard and a distinct outcry to move away from lore being introduced through other mediums like books and comics, there are going to be more moments like the end of 8.3 and overall most of BFA. Stories have to develop over time or they will feel rushed, but at the same time, as we've seen with BFA, if you have stories that are constrained to the schedule of a video game, there is still a very likely chance of causing the same issues because plot threads go unresolved for too long. I mean, just as an example, Sylvanas and her story in BFA. If that story was told in a book, in a more condensed manner, where anyone could get all the information about what was going on in one place, I'm willing to say there would have been a lot less animosity surrounding her story. Not because of the story choices, that will always spark debate, but because the story would have felt more complete and digestible instead of seemingly being standalone, one-off events with little to no context or connection to each other. I mean, the choices did have connections to each other, it's just the timing just felt off because the story was stretched over such a long time. So, I ask again, what did you expect from 8.3? I know what I expected. From everything I'd seen of BFA and World of Warcraft storytelling as a whole, I expected another stepping stone in the old god plot, hints at future lore to come, which there are a lot of hints at what is to come, and maybe the false cheers of complete victory over the Black Empire, N'Zoth, etc., which have for the most part occurred. But I most certainly did not expect a grand conclusion on par with Antorus or Arthas. Also ask, do you want more storytelling in the game of World of Warcraft? Or would you like to see a return to the days of Wrath and BC where we basically join in the story towards the middle and end? Where we basically get to do more interesting things and the stories kind of progress to a point where things are moving. I know I personally don't mind being a part of a story from the start. The idea of Cata to Legion basically being one big arc and being a part of that arc is awesome to me, but you might be different. At the same time, the one thing I would seriously ask of Blizzard is, at the very least, when it comes to the individual story of an expansion, please be more episodic in your storytelling, and do not fall for the trap of creating grand serials that last for years, as that format will turn entire expansions into aspects of a story instead of being their own story, which, as BFA has proven, can lead to a lot of misconceptions and overall disappointment. Now, because this is mainly a speculation channel, let's do some speculation. I want to propose the idea that the mythic boss fight might override the final cinematic and occur after it, and/or alter what we witness. The reason I suggest this is because of the dungeon journal. During the mythic version of the N'Zoth fight, the first phase is the second phase, the second phase is the third phase, and the last phase is something completely different from normal and heroic. This phase is called the Forge of Fate. Now, if you've watched my previous content, you know why I found that an interesting name to begin with. What's rather intriguing though is when you're fighting Raden, rest in peace Raden I might add, I am quite sad you are gone and we will not be able to explore your character anymore. Raden casts an ability called Charged Bonds, and every time he does so he yells, "Bound by Fate," which was changed from Bound by Death in the PTR. Now, I've speculated a lot about what Lightning/Vita does on multiple occasions. What I never really expected though was the concept of plain Vita and or Lightning being connected to the Forge of Origination and possibly Death Magic in some form. And or maybe Decay, assuming the Forge of Origination is also the Forge of Fate, and my understanding of what Vita/possibly Lightning is correct. What's currently going through my mind is a complete mess. Overall, I'm still trying to process this information and whether it's important or not. What it does do, however, is raise a few questions and get your mind thinking about the phase, especially considering the Forge of Origination can be corrupted by N'Zoth, and if corrupted, can apparently be used to re-originate the Black Empire onto Azeroth, or something along those lines, assuming I've understood the quest text correctly. These queries led me to think about the two big elephants in the room, and how they may affect the mythic version of the encounter. The first elephant being, are we really going to leave the Sword of Sargeras impaled in the planet? I mean, for some reason I personally think that sword is going to be there until the Titans return, but staying on the more practical side, for the most part, that sword should be a problem for Azeroth, and if N'Zoth does manage to invade or subvert the Heart Chamber, it would be interesting to see if the sword ended up playing a part in our attempts to stop N'Zoth, considering the Heart Chamber is assumedly near the sword. The second elephant in the room is the Heart of Azeroth. I am assuming we are not keeping the heart when we go into Shadowlands, though admittedly it would explain how we get out of the Maw. But anyway, assumedly we are going to lose the heart at some point. The question is, how? This is where an image shown to me by Lhok from Shinies and Lucydos starts to get you thinking about what's actually going to happen. The image you are currently looking at is of an item called the Heart of Gorgrak. It's a quest item named after a Magdaron that we fought in WoD as a part of the Garrison campaign. Now, I know what this is, and I can tell you right now, I am more stunned that this item got an in-game representation than the fact it looks fairly similar to the Heart of Azeroth. The Heart of Gorgrak is one of the Titan relics that were fused onto the Colossals by Agrimar, the generation of Breakers before the Magdaron. The Colossals used these relics to destroy Batan, the last original Spore Mound. How they did so goes as follows. They dug their rocky hands into the Spore Mound and clung tight to its giant form. In unison, the Colossals unleashed the energy stored in the Titan relics, channeling it through themselves and the Batan. A massive explosion ripped through the Spore Mound and the Colossals. The blast was so immense that it shattered their bodies and hurled the pieces across Draenor. So, where what happened in 8.3 shouldn't be that surprising anymore, as in the idea of channeling a creature's life essence through a Titan relic, the main takeaway from this item is actually in the aftermath. Why? Well, first, where yes the Spore Mound died, its influence certainly didn't. The spores from the Spore Mound were the cause of flesh on Draenor. Then there's what the relics did to the remains of the Colossals. You know Blackrock ore? That's the charred remains of the Colossals. The reason why the Colossals turned into nearly indestructible ore was because the relics had burned away their life essence and scorched their bodies. Now, I don't think Blizzard is game enough to kill the champions of Azeroth. You know, our characters. But assuming the Forge of Origination fails, what do you think is going to need to happen to defeat N'Zoth? My bets are Azeroth, Magni, maybe Mother, or something else is going to have to pull Colossals, and we're going to have to help them do it. And honestly, if this just happens to occur in Silithus or around the Sword of Sargeras, that would be a surprisingly tidy way to get rid of the sword and end the expansion, as Batan is basically described as a giant that would have equaled, if not been bigger than the Sword of Sargeras. But, I'll be honest, this is wild as hell speculation. Even I don't expect this to happen. The only point that really needs to be focused on here is the notion that what we are doing has been done before in a more violent and explosive manner, and trust me when I say it was a half measure at best that put a stopgap on the Evergrowth's attempts to take Draenor, instead of outright ending them. And overall, hopefully this content has given some explanation as to what's going on with the story of World of Warcraft and why it seems so disappointing and confusing. Thank you for listening.